And you would ask me that question too. So I guess it depends. I mean, if I'm writing a check for $8,000 for tires, it's a little tough at times. So it's changed, and that's how I'm going to answer this. I'm going to answer this really candidly. If you own your equipment outright, in other words, you don't have any payments beyond your insurance and your maintenance. So you own your truck, your trailer. Even if you're running under somebody else's authority, that's fine. You can do that. I mean, have your own base plate, things like that. It can be worth it, in the sense that, like, if you're willing to, I mean, so in other words, let me answer it this way, actually. Let me get, like, really highly technical in the business sense. If you had, say, $250,000 to put into a business, and you decided to buy a truck and a trailer, and then get your authority or go under somebody else's authority, get all that stuff set up, pay your down payment for your insurance premiums, and on and on. If you do all that, and then get on the road, and then have to have enough money, let's say, to pay for your maintenance and upkeep if you run into problems. So you have a little bit in reserve, 20, 30 grand in reserve. It would be a tough call now, because the freight rates just don't line up to be all that profitable based on that kind of investment. And it's why I started doing this channel, not for money. I started doing this channel in the first place originally, because I started seeing this more and more in business, and I noticed how many people are not seeing this. They're putting these ridiculous investments into things that the ROI just isn't there. Real estate is a really good example of this. I'm not going to go into a real estate diatribe, but if you've seen my previous videos, you've seen the other videos I've done on real estate where I talk about these guys who are they'll buy a property for $600,000 that's going to cash flow them $450, $500 a month, and it's like that's an insane risk to take. That's an insane amount of not just your down payment, but your liability, your exposure to make 5 bills. I mean, you're better off working at a goddamn gas station than you are doing that. And that's becoming the problem. Again, this is too many dollars chasing too few profit opportunities, and that includes truck driving. Right? Even if you're the owner operator, even if you're the owner and the operator, you're the driver as well. You do what I do. You own the equipment, and then you get in the equipment and you drive it around the country, right? At your own risk and expense, and at your own time, because that's all the time that you're going to spend on the roads. You're going to work 70, 80 hours a week, or more, and then make your way home, deal with all the traffic, deal with all the potential problems, deal with the DOT, deal with all that shit, right? Well, you have to then ask yourself, is the ROI there? Now, the problem, of course, is the constant idea of people telling you, well, hey, just finance it. We'll put you into something and then finance it. The bigger problem there is that now you've added another party in there that you have to pay them now, and it sucks up whatever profit you have. This is what they're doing, by the way, to a lot of illegals that are coming here. They're fattening them up for the kill too. They don't speak English, many of them. So even if you showed illegals my videos, all they hear is they just see some gringo speaking gibberish, right? Because they don't speak English. And that's the biggest problem. And in fact, I've actually covered that in a couple of other videos too, that's actually the biggest problem. See, if they spoke, if you took everything I'm saying and translated it into Spanish or into whatever language that people are speaking, and if they truly understand, because a lot of these people are smart enough, they can understand, they just understand English. And if they understood what I understand about the industry, most of them would go, no, I'm not signing any of that shit. I'm not agreeing to any of these deals. I'm not agreeing to doing any of this stuff with your company. And that's a real problem. So, yeah, as far as answering your question is is it worth it? I mean, it really depends on what you mean by is it worth whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's a 7-Eleven franchise or driving a truck. But most people, of course, what they're after is they just want to own something kind of on paper. They don't really own it. They just make a little money off it and then fuck off, right? That's what they're wanting to do. That's like 99% of so-called business owners out there. There's very few business owners that are really as hands-on as me and my partners and so forth. There's a few of us out here that we are independents, not just in trucking but in other industries as well. And we are a lot more hands-on. We do a lot of this stuff, so we don't just it's why I'm busy, right? It's why I can't do this stuff 5-6 hours a day. It isn't because I have people that scream like, "Why don't you do a podcast?" Like, it isn't because I'm not anti-podcast, and it isn't because I don't want to talk to people. It's that, well, first of all, I am kind of antisocial, but it's that I just have other stuff to do. And even if you pay me to do a podcast, right? First of all, you pay me a lot of money to do that. No one's going to do that. But then I lose out on the very reason why people follow is because I actually still do all this stuff. And so there's a level of grounding that exists. Most people who get themselves involved in social media, just like I've said on many occasions, I don't consider social media a business model. I really do not. I consider it like a hobby, a glorified hobby that you might make a little money off of if you're any good at it. But as far as a business model, somebody else is in control of it. As evidence today, I posted a tweet on X where I just pointed out that that search engines, right? If you look for anything that's controversial, or for my friends across the pond, controversial, I think that's how you say that. If you look for anything, it just doesn't pop up. You just never see it, right? You just get nothing but propaganda. Well, that's the same thing with social media. As soon as you say something that is outside of their guidelines, whatever those are, because the guidelines change about every 5 minutes of the day. Probably not even that. It's probably every 30 seconds of the day. Probably about as often as stock changes hands, which is once every 30 seconds. So, yeah, I mean, it's like because those guidelines change, there's no way of ever knowing if you're up against them or not. That was, by the way, I mean, and not to get into a rant on that, but I mean, like, that's the whole idea behind the Constitution, by the way. When James Madison, penned, I think it was Madison, yeah, it was Madison, who penned the Constitution, the idea behind it was a fixed body of laws, and that came from the Roman idea, that I think was the 12 tables of Roman law, and the idea was that it was a fixed body of laws. That way everybody knew the rules. So in other words, we're going to create a game, but we're going to create the rules, and they're not going to change. That way people can get good at the game, rather than constantly keep changing the game to the point where nobody gets good at anything, and you have this overall breakdown of the division of labor, breakdown of currency, breakdown of everything, and that's what you get now. You get this, the complete breakdown of basically everything. Phenomenal technology, sure, we can do this, but everything else outside of that, no, it's breaking down, it's falling apart, right? I mean, like you've got good technology in this sense, right? But everything else is just slowly deteriorating because people don't know how to do a lot of this stuff, or they just don't want to. And if they don't, when your maintenance people, your guys who do the maintenance and upkeep of civilization, stop being interested in doing that, then your civilization is doomed. You're going to go right back to where ashes to ashes, dust to dust. That's exactly what'll happen. Okay, and of course on top of that we have this Tower of Babel problem that's factored into it as well. Again, I'm all over the place on this, but it's like, it's not without reason, and it's because this stuff has all affected the idea of what it's like to be in business. Because I take, that's the question I take this as, is not whether or not it's whether or not it's profitable to be an owner operator. It's just like, what business is profitable anymore? And I would argue that most small businesses now aren't, because they're being cleaned out by the idea of subsidizing everybody else, all of your competitors. And in the trucking world, and I'll title this a trucking report, because this is really more along those lines. In the trucking world, that's happening too. You're seeing more and more of these big mega carriers, right? They are getting subsidies on the back end. I don't give a shit what anybody out there says. Dude, you're like, well, but there are records, and no, dude, even if they're just being given a giant briefcase of $100 bills, it really doesn't matter. These guys are getting subsidies on the back end to do all this shit because the math doesn't bear out. And when you see these loads that guys are telling that you're taking for $1.10 a mile, when you know goddamn good and well there's no way that it works out, that's a negative number, it means they're being subsidized. So I hope in my circuitous way I've answered that question fairly thoroughly, but left with enough mystery that you can think for yourself.